I was standing 5 feet away, obscured by a massive floral arrangement of white hydrangeas, watching my new sister-in-law, Jessica, hover over the sweetheart table. She looked around, her eyes darting like a nervous bird, ensuring no one was watching. Satisfied, she swirled the glass, watching the powder dissolve into the expensive vintage Dom Perignon. She placed it precisely at my seat, right next to my place card that read, Mrs. Sarah Bennett. Then, she smoothed her emerald bridesmaid dress and walked away with a smirk that chilled my blood. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew Jessica hated me. For 3 years, she had made it her mission to remind me that I was a shopkeeper's daughter, marrying into the Bennett dynasty, an old-money American family that treated their lineage like a religion. But this wasn't just a snide comment about my off-the-rack shoes or a passive-aggressive remark about my parents' tax bracket. This was physical. This was sabotage. I walked over to the table. The reception was in full swing. 300 guests were mingling under a silk tent in the Hamptons, the air thick with the smell of lobster and expensive perfume. My husband, Mark, was across the room, laughing with his college buddies. I looked at the 2 glasses. Mine, spiked with God knows what, and hers, sitting innocently at the maid of honor seat next to me. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look for a moral high ground. I reached out, my hands trembling just slightly, and switched the glasses. 10 minutes later, the DJ lowered the music. A hush fell over the crowd as Jessica tapped a spoon against her glass, my glass. She stood up, radiating that effortless, wealthy confidence she had weaponized against me since day one. She raised the flute high. To the happy couple, she announced, her voice dripping with fake honey. And to Sarah, who finally got what she wanted. She took a long, deep sip. She drained half the glass. I picked up the glass that was originally hers. I raised it, and I smiled. Because I knew something Jessica didn't. The real wedding drama hadn't even started yet. To understand why I didn't stop her, you have to understand the war zone I've been living in. The Bennetts aren't just a family. They are a corporation. Mark is the heir to a logistics empire, and his mother, Eleanor, runs the family social calendar like a military operation. When Mark first brought me home, Eleanor looked at me like I was a stain on her Persian rug. But Jessica? Jessica was the pit bull. It started small. When we announced our engagement, Jessica accidentally spilled red wine on my white blouse 5 minutes before family photos. When I chose a venue, she called the manager and canceled my reservation, claiming she was my assistant, forcing us to scramble for a backup date. She whispered rumors to Mark's friends that I was only in it for the settlement. She tried to break us up a dozen times, but Mark, sweet, oblivious Mark, always brushed it off. That's just Jess, he'd say. She's protective. She'll come around. She didn't come around. She escalated. 2 days before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, I overheard her talking to her mother in the hallway. "Don't worry, Mom," she hissed. "I have a plan. By the time the toasts are over on Saturday, Sarah will be the laughingstock of New York. Mark won't be able to look at her without being disgusted. The annulment will be signed by Monday." I had spent the last 48 hours in a state of paranoia, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I checked my makeup for irritants. I checked my shoes for broken glass. But I never expected her to go for the drink right at the head table. It was bold. It was desperate. And it meant whatever was in that glass was designed to be instantaneous. Back at the reception, Jessica was holding the microphone. The plan was for her to give a 5-minute speech about our childhoods. She didn't know me in childhood, obviously, so she had prepared a speech about Mark, effectively erasing me from my own wedding narrative. "Mark has always been the golden boy," Jessica said, her voice booming over the speakers. "He deserves a partner who understands the weight of the Bennett name. Someone who fits." She paused for effect. I took a sip of my safe champagne. It tasted like victory. Suddenly, Jessica blinked. A confused look crossed her face. She reached up and touched her forehead, her perfectly applied foundation glistening with a sudden sheen of sweat. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she stammered. "Mark deserves. She swayed. Visibly, a murmur went through the crowd. Eleanor, sitting at the mother's table, frowned. She made a subtle gesture for Jessica to wrap it up. But Jessica couldn't wrap it up. Whatever she had put in that drink was hitting her system with the force of a freight train. Her eyes dilated. She gripped the microphone stand so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at me, confusion warring with panic. I feel, she mumbled into the mic. Then, a giggle bubbled up out of her throat. It wasn't a happy giggle. It was manic.
Whoa.
The room is spinning. Why is the room spinning, Sarah? She said my name with such venom, even in her delirious state, that the guests shifted uncomfortably. You know, Jessica said, her voice losing its polished mid-Atlantic accent and becoming slurry and raw. You think you won. You think because you have the ring, you have the money. She leaned over the table, knocking over a vase. Water spilled onto the white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric like a dark omen. But Mom and we have the trust documents. The room went silent. Dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the grass. Mark turned to look at his sister, his brow furrowed. Jess, what are you talking about? Sit down, you're not well. I'm fine, she shrieked, pulling away from Mark's hand. The sudden movement made her stumble back. She clutched her stomach. A grimace of pain twisted her face. It was becoming clear that the powder wasn't just a sedative or a hallucinogen. It was a purgative, a violent, instant-onset laxative meant to cause uncontrollable bodily function failure. She had intended for me to soil myself in my white wedding gown in front of 300 of society's elite. Karma, however, has a wicked sense of humor. Jessica doubled over, clutching the microphone. The sound of her heavy, panicked breathing amplified through the speakers. I need to go, she gasped. But she didn't move. She couldn't. The paralysis that often accompanies strong sedatives was kicking in, fighting against the urgent need of her digestive system. She was trapped in her own body. Sarah, she groaned, looking directly at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She knew. In that moment, she realized exactly what had happened. You switched them. Because she was still holding the mic, everyone heard it. You switched them. Mark looked at me, then back at Jessica. The pieces were clicking into place for him, but not fast enough. Eleanor stood up, her face pale. Cut the mic, she shouted at the DJ. Cut it now. But the DJ was too slow, or maybe he was enjoying the show too much. I was supposed to ruin you, Jessica screamed, the confession tearing out of her as her control dissolved. It was just a little powder. Just enough to make you yourself on the dance floor. Why aren't you sick? Why am I sick? And then it happened. The biological inevitability. A loud, wet sound echoed through the high-end sound system. The collective gasp of 300 people sucked the air out of the tent. Jessica froze. The back of her emerald dress turned a dark, horrifying shade. The smell hit the front row instantly. She dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud of feedback. She stood there, trembling, humiliation washing over her in waves, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. It was tragic. It was grotesque. And it was exactly what she had planned for me. Mark stood up, knocking his chair over. He wasn't looking at Jessica anymore. He was looking at his mother, Eleanor. Because Jessica had said, Mom and I have the trust documents. Eleanor rushed to the stage, trying to cover Jessica with a shawl, signaling for the security team to help. They dragged a sobbing, soiled Jessica off the stage and towards the portable luxury restrooms, but the damage was done. The image was burned into everyone's retinas. The video phones that had been recording the speeches were now capturing the fall of the Bennett princess. I sat perfectly still. I didn't smile anymore. I put on a mask of concern, the dutiful sister-in-law. I stood up and walked over to Mark. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. She said she tried to drug you? Mark whispered, his voice shaking. I saw her put something in my glass, Mark, I said softly, grabbing his hand. I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe it was a sugar or medicine. So I just swapped them to be safe. I never thought she would actually poison me. Mark looked at the empty glass at Jessica's seat. Then he looked at his mother, who was frantically ordering the wedding planner to get the band playing again. The reception, needless to say, was over. People were polite, they stayed for a bit, but the appetite was gone. The smell lingered. The gossip was already flying through WhatsApp groups and social circles. But the real explosion happened an hour later in the bridal suite. I was changing out of my dress, my pristine, white, unsoiled dress, when Mark stormed in. He wasn't alone. He had dragged Eleanor in with him. Jessica was reportedly in the hotel room, sedated by a doctor and rehydrating, refusing to speak to anyone. "Tell me it's not true," Mark demanded, cornering his mother. "Tell me you didn't know Jessica was planning to drug my wife at our wedding." Eleanor, usually the ice queen, looked rattled. She smoothed her skirt. "Mark, don't be dramatic. It was a prank. Jessica has a crude sense of humor. It went wrong." "A prank?" Mark shouted. "She admitted it on a hot mic. And she mentioned the trust documents." "What about the trust documents, Mother?" Eleanor went silent. Her eyes flickered to me. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that I wasn't just some passive girl she could bulldoze. I was the one standing there, clean and composed, while her daughter was the disaster. "The trust," I said, stepping forward. "The one that unlocks when Mark turns 30? Or gets married? Which is today?" Mark turned to me. "What do you know?" "I know that your grandmother left a specific clause," I said. I had done my homework. I had hired a private investigator 3 months ago when the bullying started getting severe. I needed to know what I was up against. If Mark marries before 30, he gets full control of the Bennett family holdings. If he doesn't, or if the marriage is annulled within 6 months due to scandalous behavior or incompatibility, the control remains with the trustee. You, Eleanor. Mark turned back to his mother, his face turning red. Is that what this was? You wanted her to humiliate herself so publicly that I'd be forced to annul the marriage to save face? You wanted to keep control of the company. Eleanor pursed her lips. You aren't ready to lead, Mark. And she pointed a shaking finger at me, is a gold digger. We were protecting you. Protecting me? Mark laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You just had your daughter poison my wife. You realized that if Sarah hadn't switched those glasses, that would be her right now? Destroyed? Humiliated? It wouldn't have killed her, Eleanor scoffed. Just encouraged an exit. Mark went quiet. He walked over to the desk in the suite, where the marriage license was sitting, signed by the officiant, but not yet mailed. Eleanor watched him, holding her breath. She thought he was going to rip it up. Instead, Mark picked up his phone. He dialed the family lawyer. Hello, Arthur? Yes, it's Mark. I'm with Mother. We need to schedule a meeting for Monday morning regarding the transition of the trustee powers. Yes, effective immediately. And Arthur? Draft a restraining order against Jessica. If she comes within 500 feet of Sarah or me, I'm pressing charges for attempted assault and poisoning. Eleanor gasped. You wouldn't. Try me, Mark said. His voice was cold. He was no longer the boy they could manipulate. He opened the door. Get out. Eleanor left. She didn't look back. She looked smaller, older. When the door clicked shut, the adrenaline finally left me. My legs gave out, and I sat on the edge of the bed. Mark sat next to me. He put his head in his hands. I am so sorry, he said. I didn't believe you. All those times you said she was mean, I didn't want to see it. It's okay, I said, putting a hand on his back. No, it's not, he looked up. You saved yourself. You shouldn't have had to. We didn't go back to the party. We ordered room service, burgers and fries, and ate them on the floor of the bridal suite in our wedding clothes. But here's the part that I never told Mark. The part that keeps me up at night sometimes, wondering if I'm just as bad as they are. When I saw Jessica drop the powder in the glass, I knew exactly what it was. Not because I'm a chemist, but because I had seen the packet in her purse earlier in the bridal room when she was touching up her lipstick. It was a chaotic, illegal diuretic and laxative mix you buy on the dark web for cleanses. I knew it was dangerous. I knew it would hurt her. I could have just poured the glass out. I could have accidentally knocked it over. I could have told Mark right then and there. But I didn't. I wanted her to drink it. I wanted her to feel the pain she wanted to inflict on me. I wanted the world to see the ugly, messy truth underneath her perfect, polished exterior. When I switched those glasses, it wasn't just self-defense. It was an execution. The next morning, the video of Jessica's speech had 1 million views. The caption was #weddingfail. She became a meme. The pooping bridesmaid. She fled to Paris to stay with an aunt, deleting all her social media. Eleanor was forced into early retirement from the board of the charity organization she loved so much, the scandal of her involvement in the poisoning plot being too much for high society to ignore. Mark took over the company. We bought a house, not in the Hamptons, but far away, in California. We are happy. We have a dog. We are expecting our first child. But every year on our anniversary, we open a bottle of Dom Perignon. Mark pours 2 glasses. He toasts to us, to our survival. I drink mine and I smile. But I always watch him pour it. And I always check the bubbles. Because if I learned anything from the Bennetts, it's that you never, ever take your eyes off your glass. And you never underestimate the quiet girl sitting at the table. She might just be waiting for you to make a toast.